Hello, you're watching EASDtv. We're going to talk about adipose tissue. Now, adipose biology wasn't a thing 15 years ago. Everybody thought that it was just this inert stuff that just sat there and did nothing. But now we know so very differently. And there was a session on adipose tissue today. And let me introduce you to two of the people who were speaking. So Alice Williamson, who's from Queen Mary University, London, and she was speaking on...
I'm speaking on the genetics of insulin resistance in muscle and adipose tissue.
Okay. And we also have with us Laurie Goodyear, who's come to us all the way from the Joslin Diabetes Center at Harvard Medical School. You've had a hideous flight, so you delayed all over the place. So thank you for being with us. And just tell us briefly your subject.
So my laboratory studies the effects of exercise on adipose tissue and the remarkable effects that exercise has on changing and remodels adipose tissue.
So why have we had this sea change in opinion about adipose tissue?
Well, I think what the field has really discovered is that adipose tissue, as you said before, is not an inert tissue. It's not just storing lipid. It's actually an endocrine organ that's secreting many different factors throughout the body and having remarkable effects on lots of different tissues throughout the body. Certainly adipose tissue adapts to obesity conditions. Adipose tissue is altered, we now know is greatly altered in people with type 2 diabetes. So there's just been a real discovery of how important this tissue is for regulation of metabolism throughout the body.
And I'm guessing it's quite an exciting field for a researcher. I mean, Alice, what attracted you to this field?
I think I've always been interested in type 2 diabetes and the sort of genetic architecture underlying this. And I think one of the sort of things that has been under-investigated is the role of adipose tissue and postprandial insulin resistance in contributing to the genetic risk of diabetes. And I think it's only now that we really have sufficient sample size and population studies with the specific measures that we need in order to study this available. So it's sort of the right time now to look at this.
And what's your research showing in this area?
So in our study, we identified that the genetic architecture of post-challenge insulin resistance using insulin measures during an oral glucose tolerance test. And this allowed us to identify a number of new genetic loci that have been implicated in post-challenge insulin resistance that overlap with type 2 diabetes. And one of the loci that we identified is at a gene called SLC2A4, and this encodes GLUT4, which is the main glucose transporter in adipose tissue. So this is a finding that we were particularly excited about.
It's very exciting. And what are the implications of that? If you're an ordinary, no, I know none of you are ordinary, you diabetologists out there, but what does that mean, do you think, for people who treat patients, potentially?
I think it really highlights the importance of this pathway and the role of adipose tissue and post-challenge insulin resistance in diabetes onset. And I think having sort of human genetic evidence sort of provides a starting point to try and think about whether any of the genes that we've identified in these genetic studies, amongst other studies, could potentially be sort of therapeutic targets for diabetes. And this is a pathway that currently isn't targeted by any drug on the market.
So it's a window into the future in terms of what might be done in terms of therapeutics. But it's also, I suspect, something where, I mean, we're thinking about the subtypes in type 2 diabetes. You know, it's a bit like adipose biology, isn't it? We used to think it was a blob of fat and that was it. And, you know, type 2 diabetes was the good diabetes that was only a touch of diabetes. You know, now we know so differently. And we also know that actually there are different subtypes of type 2. And might your findings be added to this, you know, classification of subtypes?
Yes, I think it's possible. Certainly, in terms of genetic subtypes, the data that we've generated has been integrated into the latest efforts that have tried to identify genetic subtypes of type 2 diabetes. But I think it sort of highlights that maybe it's worthwhile also integrating measures that try and capture insulin resistance in adipose tissue into more phenotypic subtypes of diabetes as well.
So, Laurie, how about your research on exercise? And why did you get into exercise?
Well, my whole career has really been on exercise and the benefits. I started as a researcher to understand how exercise could promote glucose uptake into skeletal muscle. Where people with type 2 diabetes are insulin resistant, but if people with type 2 diabetes go out and exercise, they can improve glucose uptake into skeletal muscle. But we realized that it's not just about skeletal muscle. There's effects of exercise on probably every tissue and cell in the body, and we became particularly interested in adipose tissue at the time when we started to realize that adipose tissue was an endocrine organ. So some of our first experiments, we actually took adipose tissue and transplanted it into sedentary mice. And if you took trained adipose tissue and put it into a sedentary mouse, the mouse began to look like a trained animal. So we knew that there was something very special about the adipose tissue, that it was secreting really beneficial types of factors. And so now we're trying to understand what those factors are, because those have potential clinical implications, potential treatments that we could use to treat patients with type 2 diabetes.
I think I'm right in saying that it releases a weak estrogen when women exercise, so that helps ease through the menopause if women exercise.
Yes,
because of the effect of that.
Yeah, that
conversion into weak forms
part of the effect. Yeah, it's also very interesting because men and women have very different responses to exercise in terms of what happens to their adipose tissue, and we're still trying to understand that and figure out how that exactly happens, and what are the implications for that also for men and women who exercise.
And is adipose tissue biology a growing field? Are more and more people getting into it?
I think that is the case. Certainly, in terms of genetic data sets available, there are now there is more data available for that has tried to annotate regulatory regions within adipose tissue.
So the next time you curse that roll round your middle, just think it's really remarkable tissue. Not just a roll around your middle.
That's right. And I think that that's true. You can have adaptations of the so-called visceral fat, the fat around the middle, but it's also the fat that's we consider it more under the skin, the subcutaneous fat. And that fat we know is a healthier type of fat, and that fat adapts very well to exercise as well.
So there's lots of good news here for people living with diabetes, both type 1 and type 2.
Yes.
Relating to exercise.
Absolutely.
And how important it is.
Yes, yeah. It's not just about the muscle, it's about the beneficial effects on adipose tissue and so many other tissues throughout the body.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both very much for coming in to talk to us here at EASDtv. And there'll be more really exciting science a bit later on EASDtv. Bye for now.